Welcome to Weather and More. I'm meteorologist Mark. Today we're looking at one of the most important weather forecasts ever made. On June 6, 1944, nearly 160,000 Allied troops crossed the English Channel and stormed the beaches of Normandy in Nazi-occupied France. The operation would become known as D-Day. But what many people don't realize is that the invasion almost didn't happen on June 6th. In fact, the entire operation depended on a weather forecast. A forecast made before weather satellites existed, before Doppler radar, before computer models. And if that forecast had been wrong, thousands more soldiers might have died and the invasion itself could have failed. This is the story of the meteorologist who helped win World War II. Military commanders have always worried about weather. Napoleon's army suffered during the Russian winter. The Spanish Armada was scattered by storms. Even today, weather can ground aircraft, delay troop movements, and disrupt communications. But D-Day required weather conditions that were unusually specific. The Allies needed a full moon, low tide shortly after dawn, relatively calm seas, acceptable visibility for aircraft, and winds weak enough for airborne operations. Why low tide? Because the Germans had filled the beaches with obstacles. Many were hidden underwater. Landing at low tide allowed Allied engineers to see them and clear paths through them. Why the full moon? Because thousands of paratroopers would be dropped behind enemy lines during darkness. Moonlight helped navigation. Those requirements narrowed the possible invasion dates to only a few days each month. The weather couldn't just be good, it had to be good on the right day. One of the most fascinating parts of this story is that weather forecasting in 1944 was primitive by today's standards. No satellites, no weather radar network, no supercomputers. Meteorologists relied on surface observations, ship reports, and keep in mind those ships are often sailing around the storm systems, so your data is coming from around the storm, not from within the storm, which would probably be even more helpful. Even weather balloons. Yes, weather balloons, first invented in 1892 by the French. But back then you had to wait for the balloon to burst, fall back to the earth, and then take the data back and look at the recorded data and try to decipher that. It could take days or weeks. Even before that, kites had been used as early as 1749, though they only carried thermometers and they only went up so high. Incidentally, that might be where Ben Franklin got his kite idea for dangerously studying electricity. Eventually, radio signals would be invented, and so that would help the balloons by the 1930s to be able to relay that data back to Earth in near real time as they ascended up into the atmosphere. So weather balloon data was probably rather limited, but nevertheless, it was possible. They had hand-drawn maps. Yeah, those were easy to decipher. And they had their experience. The chief meteorologist advising General Eisenhower was James Stagg. Now, he's only 43 years old, and he's having to coordinate forecasts between British and American forecasting teams. He is not the envy of meteorologists today. The teams worked round the clock. Interestingly, the teams often disagreed. One group believed conditions would improve. Another believed bad weather would continue. Imagine trying to launch the largest amphibious invasion in history while your forecasting teams are arguing. Stagg's job was to make sense of conflicting forecasts and give Eisenhower one recommendation. No pressure. The original invasion date was June 5th, 1944, but then the weather turned ugly. A powerful North Atlantic storm moved toward the English Channel. Conditions deteriorated rapidly. There were strong winds, heavy seas, low clouds, poor visibility. Landing craft were tossed around violently. Aircraft operations became risky. Paratrooper drops became questionable. The weather looked so bad that Stagg advised postponement. Think about what that meant. Thousands of ships had already assembled. Hundreds of thousands of troops were ready. The entire operation depended on secrecy. Part of that secrecy even involved weather data from the Atlantic that the Allies kept to themselves. Every delay increased the risk that Germany would discover Allied intentions. Yet, the forecast was bad enough that Eisenhower called off the June 5th invasion. That decision alone was monumental. Now comes the most dramatic part of the story. Late on June 4th, Stagg detected something unusual. Looking at the surface maps and other data that he had, though it was limited, he believed there would be a brief break in the storm. Not perfect weather, just a temporary improvement, a narrow weather window. He forecast that conditions on June 6th would be significantly better than June 5th. Not ideal, but good enough. In other words, it could be survivable, hopefully. The forecast was controversial. Remember, there's no satellites. Meteorologists had limited observations from the Atlantic Ocean. Forecast skill dropped rapidly with distance from observation stations. Yet Stagg became convinced there would be a short lull. During an early morning meeting with Allied commanders, he presented his recommendation. Launch on June 6th. General Eisenhower listened carefully. Then he faced one of the most consequential decisions in military history. Go or wait. If he waited too long, the next acceptable tidal and moon conditions wouldn't arrive for weeks, and the weather during that period was uncertain. Finally, Eisenhower made his decision. Go. History turned on those words. Here's a fascinating detail many people don't know. German meteorologists reached a different conclusion. They believed bad weather would continue. Because of that forecast, many German commanders relaxed their readiness. Some officers left their post. Others attended training exercises. Most famously, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel traveled back to Germany. He reportedly intended to spend time with his family and purchase a birthday gift for his wife. The Germans simply did not expect a major invasion during such poor weather. In a strange twist, the same storm that threatened the Allies also helped hide them. The rough weather encouraged German commanders to believe an invasion was impossible. The Allies saw an opportunity. The Germans saw continued bad weather. One forecast was closer to reality, and history changed because of it. So was the forecast correct? In a short answer, yes, but with an important caveat. Conditions on June 6th were far from ideal. Many troops became seasick and or absolutely exhausted even before battle began. Landing craft struggled in rough water. Clouds remained an issue. Winds were stronger than commanders would have preferred. But conditions were substantially better than they had been on June 5th. And they were indeed good enough. That brief improvement in the weather allowed for airborne operations, naval bombardment, amphibious landings, and resupply efforts. The forecast wasn't predicting beautiful weather. It was predicting weather that was just good enough to launch the invasion. Sometimes that's all a forecast needs to do. Today's meteorologists use satellites, radar networks, ocean buoys, aircraft observations, sophisticated computer models, and on and on. In fact, today's technology, with satellites used for both weather and for tracking military enemies, might have made this invasion more difficult in today's world. Just something to think about. Forecasts still aren't perfect, but they're vastly better than what forecasters had in 1944. Yet one thing hasn't changed. Weather still influences history. And on June 6, 1944, a small team of meteorologists helped shape the outcome of World War II. Their forecast gave Eisenhower the confidence to launch the largest amphibious invasion ever attempted. It wasn't just a military gamble. It was a weather gamble, and it worked. On D-Day, bullets and bombs shaped the battle, but a weather forecast chose the day. Don't forget to visit the D-Day Memorial in Bedford, Virginia if you're ever up that way. Bedford lost more men per capita than any other U.S. state, thus placing the memorial there. Thank you so much for listening. I'm meteorologist Mark, and this has been Weather and War.